Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
If we think that God made the whole of the world, then we expect there to be an affinity between the various parts of the world and sort of an organic sense of things. I suppose you could go further and say, well, we are products of that world. The whole evolutionary sense that we hold in modern theology, and of course which we borrow from the world of science, really sees us humans as the product of that whole evolving world. What do we call ourselves? The leading edge of creation.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Dr. Julius Gillis, professor of economics at the University of Toledo. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of nature and meditation. Here's Father Bacik.
Jules, one of the interesting experiences I had lately was visiting your garden and roaming around and seeing the beautiful trees and the cactus plants, I think, which is some of your favorite things. And in that garden, I spotted a couple of parrots, and I was looking for what was holding them down and didn't find anything until I found out their wings were clipped a bit. And they're roaming freely in your garden. And then you really shocked me when you went over and said, see these bees here, and started petting the bees. Well, I'm not into petting bees, but it was interesting to me that you could do that and get away with it. And so out of that experience of roaming in your garden for a few minutes and talking to you, my whole imagination is jogged a bit, and I'm trying to sort of, I guess, improve my own sense of finding God in nature. I've been trying to do that in a number of ways lately. And so I thought maybe we could talk a bit about nature and meditation, finding God in nature, and so on. Does that sound like an agreeable topic to you?
Oh, it'd be very interesting, Father.
Okay, we'll pursue that. You want to tell me about that petting bees to begin with? I mean, that sort of took me back.
Well, doesn't everybody do that?
Not that I know.
Well, I just do not.
St. Francis of Assisi did it, but I haven't seen anybody else do it.
Well, I like to think I have a microcosm in my backyard. I have all forms of life, from many weeds to some tomato plants and even some flowers. And among them I have quite a few birds and even a tortoise hiding there someplace that I see occasionally. I do have a couple parrots as well. We spend most of the day outside. But I really do not know why the bees do not sting me. I just do not try to harm them. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that if the animal has this idea that it will not be harmed, it will never strike back.
It's interesting. A priest friend of mine I was talking to a ways back was saying that he used to go out jogging, was always bothered by the dogs and so on, which would be one of my own problems as well. But he was starting to get in touch with nature, and he told me that the dogs started reacting differently to him. And they didn't bother him as much, and when they'd come around, he would just talk soothingly to them, and he didn't have any difficulty. And I found that to be a bit humorous, but I guess it fits in. I guess it fits in with a general notion of the harmony of creation, doesn't it? I mean, if we think that God made the whole of the world, then we expect there to be an affinity between the various parts of the world and sort of an organic sense of things. I suppose you could go further and say, well, we are products of that world. The whole evolutionary sense that we hold in modern theology, and of course which we borrow from the world of science, really sees us humans as the product of that whole evolving world. What do we call ourselves? The leading edge of creation, or the result of these millions and millions of years of the evolutionary process, so that we come out of the animal kingdom and we continue to carry the animal world with us in our bodies and continue to be related to it. So from that theoretical viewpoint, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's just that for myself, and I suppose for many others, we don't really sense those connections, or they're not very real to us. Maybe you're one of those people who are more in touch with it.
In a way, there is a certain amount of harmony, I should say a great degree of harmony in nature. And yet, nature can be very cruel, particularly when we see a big fish eat a smaller fish. So here again, we could say, hey, there is no harmony there.
What I would get out of what you're saying is that despite the fact that parts of nature harm other parts, that there's a sort of a general beauty to the thing overall, or a harmony from a higher perspective. Does that sound like
I think that's a good way
of
of putting it, Father. I think harmony from a higher perspective, even though in the sort of smaller micro activities we do find quite a bit of cruelty. Yet in my backyard, of course, which is only a little chunk of nature, I try to minimize it, be a sort of a policeman and keep order there as much as possible. But among plant life, I mean, I could see this harmony in very greater degree, where old plants provide nutrients for new plants and so forth. But of course, I also see that the little beetles that eat my aphids, of course, are also eaten up by the birds. So that is the sad part occasionally. But again, there is this harmony from the higher, larger point of view.
Yes, right. I guess that partly that would reflect life again. When we look at human life, we don't see just total peacefulness and so on. The cross is part of life, and there is a dying in order to rise that we talk about in our Christian tradition. It seems as though that is part of the pattern of life as God has produced it for us, and it's built into the whole of the structure of nature and of our human society as well. The dying to self in order to rise to the new life. And I suppose what you were describing to me, if I was to try to pick up on it and so on, would make concrete in a way that the generalized teaching of the Scriptures. And I'd probably like to apply it then to our human existence and think, well, there's times in which we have to exercise hard if we're going to keep our bodies in shape and therefore function more effectively. At times we're going to have to do penance and discipline ourselves so that we get rid of some of the rough edges and the sinfulness that's in us so that we can live the life of the Lord more clearly and manifest that to the world. And finally, I mean, I think we that's our own fate as well. We move towards death. We're moving towards a death that we believe is a barrier to us, but a barrier that we break through into a new and richer life. So it becomes the whole pattern of life. In fact, it's what we find in the life of Jesus Christ as well. He spoke about carrying the cross. He spoke about the sufferings of life, but he transformed them, showed a way in which we rise above all of that. And through his own handing of himself over, he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And what we believe is that the Father then has raised him to life, and that he has the richer, glorified life that he shares with us. So in that sense, he epitomizes not only what we find in the human community, but what we would find in the whole of the organic world as well, the world of the animals and the plants that you've been describing for us. In your little microcosm, I like that. The garden is the microcosm. Yeah. Well, it's the world in miniature, huh?
That's exactly what I mean, a world in miniature. Yeah. There's a lot of joy that goes on, and there's a lot of tragedy that goes on. Very analogously, you could see wars under a blade of grass between two colonies of ants that take place there, and to them, of course, is the greatest tragedy. But here you look from above and you wonder, what sort of forces guide them to behave that way, and sometimes you wonder what forces guide for human beings to inflict damage upon each other. I think the garden it creates a great atmosphere for all kinds of meditation. Even the question like mathematical question, what's infinity, what's eternity? for which I have no answers, of course, but it's a tremendous exercise by just sitting there and thinking that this garden, this life will perpetuate itself for years and years, long after I will be dead. A lot of these trees will be standing there. There's something awesome about it, There's something eternal. And here the master of the yard, in a sense, is not a master. I'm a master, a keeper only for a very short period of time, and even everybody in the garden will do quite well without me. I
like that. I like the meditation idea, the way you're getting it in there, because that's, I think, what we wanted to talk about, nature and meditation. And it would seem that maybe part of the meditative process is simply observation, just taking time out to look closely. I suppose for many of us living busy lives, we never get around to doing that. I guess that common cliched phrase is take time to smell the flowers, which we see on posters and so on, probably speaks an important lesson. That is, for us who live busy lives, we got a lot of activity, we're running here and there. Part of any meditative spirit would be to take time and to look, to observe, to just see what is there. As a matter of fact, that's one of the meditation techniques that is found in the various religious traditions, is to take, for example, as you said, a leaf or a flower, and to just stare at it, to keep looking at it, to observe every part of it. I'm remembering flashing on a line of poetry now, I'm not remembering Blake and something about finding infinity in the grain of sand. The exact phrase won't come back to me, but the message that I get out of it is that the whole of the creation speaks about the Creator, and each part of it, not just the vastness. And of course that would set you off just to look up to the stars and to begin to realize the vastness of this universe. I can never get over that, and what the astronomers tell us, and how many worlds are out there, almost uncountable number of systems that are out there in the universe.
Indeed.
And that it just boggles one's mind, but it doesn't just boggle the mind. What it ought to do is to point us to the Creator, to the power, the vastness of the Creator. But I think what you're telling me is that you don't have to just look out there to the vast universe. That's one way of getting in touch with who God is and His tremendous power and majesty and so on. But you can do it sitting in your small garden, observing very closely the blade of grass or the flower.
Indeed. I think it's an excellent way of introducing one's children into meditation, and even introducing them to religion. The children could be quite young at this time, at this point in time, and I think they would get a lot out of it, a lot more out of it, if we would talk about religion in more abstract form. After all, the children can relate to nature very well, even when they're very young. I myself was taken by the hand once by my mother, and she picked up a pea blossom, and after we examined that, for about a half hour, I really saw a face of God in that blossom. I never could forget this moment. It always stayed with me. And I did that to the same to my children. I have a boy and a girl, and they're quite young. We spend lots of time, not only in the backyard, of course, we made camping trips and so forth, but we examined very small aspects, micro aspects of nature, and we saw a lot of beauty, a lot of complexity there. And one wonders who could create such complexity. That entity must have been great intelligence and great power.
Yes, right. And that begins to put you in the religious spirit.
Indeed,
and I think there's something else that probably happens, not just the sense of wonder that comes as we would contemplate the vastness of this universe, or the complexity of the flower, or the whatever you find growing in your garden. But there's also, I think, the calming part of it, where to take a walk and to look at the trees, to sit calmly for a while, and to look at the flower, the grass, and so on. It probably puts a restfulness over our spirit. it has at least the inherent ability, I think, to give us what I've called on occasion an almost calm. To begin, not that for me it doesn't ever do it entirely, that's why I use the word almost calm, but it has a way of gearing me down a little bit and centering me. And I myself don't take nearly enough time to do that, but and I know from other people saying, however, that it really does do them tremendous amount of good. It might even lower the blood pressure a little bit. And,
I think more and more people are finding that out on their own, and this is why our wonderful city parks are loaded with people over the weekends. It's surprising. If you go to any of us city parks on a Sunday afternoon, you'll see the parks wall to wall, loaded with citizens of our city.
Probably looking for that kind of experience. Yes,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Part of it, I think what is needed in all of this, from again the Christian perspective, is to see matter in a healthy light. There's been a time in the Christian tradition when matter has been seen in a negative way. It was sort of the Platonic influence that came into the Christian understanding of things. So we often think of Plato, as the one who thought of any salvation being involved in the soul escaping from the body, so that the body is like a prison for the soul. And there's been a whole line of thought that comes from that sees the material world as sort of negative, as something that would take us away from God. And that has been had a very bad effect, I think, on Christian understanding generally. And I'm afraid, as we still have people today who are a product of that Platonic attitude. We get it through St. Augustine. And I think part of what flowed out of that was sort of then the looking down on the body, that the human body, partaking so much of the animal world, the material creation itself, would be seen as negative, as a drag on the soul. Well, surely sometimes the body is a drag. It gets tired and we have trouble concentrating and so on. But also we are our bodies, and our body is what puts us in touch with people and with nature, which links us with the animal world and with the whole of this organic environment of ours. So that I'm afraid that Augustine approach and the Platonic idea still is in our minds and hearts. And if we're going to do what you're saying, that is to be able to meditate on nature, we have to have a whole other way of looking at all of that. And one of the great proponents of that in the modern world has been Teilhard de Chardin, who died in 1955, and who was really a great proponent of building up nature and of seeing God in nature. He once talked about the Mass, not a Mass that you would say in a church, but a Mass upon the world, where the host that you were offering to God was really the whole of the material world, and all of our efforts to shape it and to transform it. And he once wrote like this, Jules, I want to read you this here, and because it captures part of his sense of matter and its importance and its beauty. He writes like this: I bless you, matter, and you I acclaim, not as the pontiffs of science or the moralizing preachers depict you as debased, disfigured, a mass of brute forces and base appetites. Not that way, but as you reveal yourself to me today in your totality and your true nature. Then he goes on to sort of this hymn, as they call it, to matter. You I acclaim as the inexhaustible potentiality for existence and transformation, wherein the predestined substance germinates and grows. And he goes on, I acclaim you as the universal power which brings together and unites, through which the many monads are bound together and in which they all converge on the way of the Spirit. I acclaim you, and he gets poetic now, I acclaim you as the melodious fountain of water, whence spring the souls of people, and as the limpid crystal whereof is fashioned the new Jerusalem. I acclaim you as the divine milieu, is the title of one of his important books, the divine milieu charged with creative power, as the ocean stirred by the Spirit, as the clay molded and infused with life by the incarnate Word. Well, a famous passage from Teilhard de Chardin is saying, not matter as debased, not matter as a drag, but matter as the potentiality for life. And I think that if we could get in tune with that in some ways, we'd probably start to be able to move more in the direction that you're describing for us. I suspect that through your training, background, family life, and so on, somehow that notion of matter got into your psyche and is one of the things that allows you to appreciate nature so well now.
It really did. Even though, as an economist, I sometimes wonder what sort of balance should there exist between materialism and spiritualism. I'm quite sure that materialism in itself is harmless, but how far should materialistic values be pursued? How much should we sacrifice of other values in order to achieve the material values? I somehow think that there should be some sort of a balance, even though in my mind I'm not sure how this line should be drawn. And I think quite a few other people would be confused regards this point.
I guess a part of, I would, in trying to respond to that, would say that I would want to start out with this tremendous care for the material world. I'm reminded of what Archbishop Temple once said, that Christianity was the most materialistic of all religions because it says that God becomes man, takes on our bodiliness, and shares in our material world. That gives it an essential goodness, and we read in our scriptures that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And I think that that gives us some sense of this value, again, of the creation that God has given us. I think the other problem is materialistic values, which would rule out the spirit, where we would say, I got to get more money, have more things, and to the detriment of my personal integrity, for example, or of the development of my prayer life, and so on. I think that's where you get the fight. So
yes, this is where the problem lies, I think.
That's how the problem would come out.
Yes.
You know, I think, Jules, we want to try to talk about this meditation idea and letting the material world work for us this way. I think some people find it by going to special places, maybe going to the lake or going to the ocean or going into the mountains and so on, so that the new place sort of jars us out of our old setting. We begin to get away from the familiar patterns of thinking, and the material environment begins to maybe refresh our spirit or touch our psyche or give us new images by which we can look at our world. And I think very often people can use it that way. This past summer when I was teaching out in San Francisco, I tried to make a retreat near the ocean. And I think that it was not a terribly successful retreat. I didn't have any great, large religious experiences at all. But I think it did me some good, despite that, in a minor kind of way. I think it refreshed my spirit and somehow put those images. I can still carry some of those images from that retreat with me. The waves lapping up onto the beach, and the crimson horizon at a sunset that I was looking at. Some of that still is in my imagination now, but I tried to use it as a way of sort of thinking in a whole new way or imagining in a new way to try to make myself more receptive to the call of God, which it turned out to be, I think, a very minor way, but still strikes me as something good to do, and I think more people are doing that these days.
I think so. All of us do become refreshed when we see a snow-covered mountain peak or a beautiful sunset on an ocean, or the low countries of South Carolina with the wind rustling through the grass. And it is very simple. It's very simple. I mean, it does not require any exercise, does not require much imagination. It does require money to get there, to enjoy those things. However, what I'm trying to stress is that with some practice and some exercise, you could find almost the same levels of joy and refreshment in one's own backyard. But this takes training, this takes time, and it takes very little money.
What would we say that one would have to do if they were to take that advice? I think part of it, to me, would be you'd have to be able to sit still for a while. You'd have to be able to be silent with yourself for a while and get away from the TV and get away from the noise of life and be able to just sit and appreciate. I think that probably would be the first step that people would have to take.
I found there are two ways. One way is the way that you have described. Be by yourself and concentrate on some form of activity in the yard that is taking place, and then let your imagination run rampant at this point. Another possibility, which I have done a number of times, is talk to one of your neighborhood children if you do not have any of your own. The age bracket anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6. And start talking to them what you're thinking and what you're seeing. And a child's mind is very receptive, and they come out with some very pointed questions which urge you on to think deeper about what you were thinking in the first place.
Oh, I like that, Julius. That's good. That's probably a good bit of advice, another way of approaching nature. Well, we've been trying to talk here about nature and meditation. I think we've gone off in a lot of different directions, but one of the prime things in my mind is to get a healthy sense of the material world to begin with, to realize it's God's creation and we have to learn to appreciate it. And then we have maybe these more specific methods. For some, it means going to a new environment if they can get there, the ocean, the mountains, to the lake, and so on. For others, it means just the backyard and observing nature close up, probably being silent with it, and as you interestingly suggested, maybe telling a youngster about what we're observing.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Dr. Julius Gillis, professor of economics at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's reflections was nature and meditation. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.